I'm Abington Patch regular and Suburban Geek blogger Mark Lombardi. And again, we are off the record on Abington News and Views. We've been talking with righties versus lefties, and with us today, again, are Republican committee person from Abington, Dr. Bob Sklarov, Republican committee person and blogger for Page 13 News, Ed Boyd, and the wonderful, sorry gentlemen, the wonderful Greg Holt, Democratic committee person also for the state from Abington. We kind of left off on presidential politics, let that carry over into some of the national issues, specifically the fact that the Catholic Church is now suing the Obama administration over some of the regulations within Obamacare. Let's start with your thoughts on that.
Well, it's very simple. The church has principles. And when Obama, quote unquote, effected a compromise, it was basically a subterfuge. The basis of the lawsuit is that the Catholic Church does not want to fund contraception and abortion. Obama, through the regs of Obamacare, wants to mandate that occur. The compromise was, well, maybe if the entity involved, like let's say a university, doesn't want to cover it, then fine, they can find a different insurance company. Trouble is, if the entity involved is self-insured, then you cannot evade the fundamental concept, and that is that Obama, the secularist, is forcing a church based on faith to fund something which the church considers to be murder.
And therefore violates the Constitution in that a church should be allowed to exercise its own discretion as to what it funds and what it doesn't fund. And obviously Obamacare would force them to fund things like abortions and perhaps contraception and things of that matter. And what I actually thought was the more amazing issue is the fact that the news story itself about the church doing so didn't really reach the radar at that time. And it seems to be a buried issue. Yes, it's something that people know about because it's been talked about. Thankfully, you got social media to bring issues like that out. But it's not something that you saw the big four media conglomerates talk about a heck of a whole lot. And
except for 17 seconds here and there.
Yeah, correct.
Except for Fox News.
Right. Just to mention the fact that it took place, not to go delve into the issue at all.
I think a point that's kind of being missed is that Obamacare is not forcing the church to cover anything, in the sense that it's not forcing anyone who works for a church to get an abortion, and it's not forcing anyone who works for a church to ask for birth control. If it's something that the church is against because they believe it's against their religion, then you would assume that the people who work for that church, who are going to be covered by that church's health care, would follow those same ideals.
How about the students at the university that's self-insured? So therefore, essentially, you have the church entity funding contraception.
And again, you would assume that children who are going to a Catholic university,
like Georgetown,
you would assume that they're going to have those same ideals. And if they're not, then who is the church to say that they don't have the right that every other American has to get an abortion or to buy birth control?
Except Georgetown employs more than just Catholics who believe.
Right.
They also probably employ atheists and other folks who may be more likely to get an abortion or to want their contraception paid for.
Greg?
Well, I think religion is always a sensitive subject. I don't think you should force any religion to do something that one of its tenets says that it doesn't want to do.
Stop right there.
I certainly can
You're
agree
right.
with that point. But going beyond that, I think the administration has signaled that it's willing to make a compromise. I don't think this got the big splash because I think many view this lawsuit for what it is. You got to fire up the base. So we're going to sue rather than sit and try and come to a compromise that works for us.
You don't see it based on principle?
We'll do a lawsuit. Now, it's interesting how here I'm hearing, if I'm hearing correctly, Don't force the church to do something it doesn't want to do.
Right.
But yet the same church will lobby to have someone who's not part of that religion not be able to exercise their free choice in the same manner. You can't, gentlemen, you can't have it both ways.
Yes, you can.
Oh, you cannot.
You're forcing them to fund. You're forcing the church to pay for something. This is beyond Obama's pseudo compromise.
Church is not about funds. Church is about belief.
No, it's also, but in this situation,
It is
about
the
funding.
belief that they don't want the government to force on them.
Right.
The funding is just a secondary
No,
issue.
it's the major
belief
issue.
that comes first.
Well, now, wait a minute.
But I'm just saying that they will very happily say, pass laws that don't allow others who don't have the same belief that I do not to have that same option.
Now, this leads us to
Like I do.
this leads us to the next point, which is there a war on religion, or is there a war on women, or is there a war on minorities in this country that both sides seem to be accusing the other of? Greg, I mean, is there a war on any of this at that point?
Well, you know, I guess it all depends on whether you're a black, a female, and what your religion is. I certainly think that a lot of the things that not just blacks, but others have worked for over the decades in terms of civil rights and legislation and job discrimination, etc. Many of those things individuals feel, get rid of it. Don't need it, it's holding us back. So I think in some ways there is. I think particularly on women, every time I hear it's like, well, I mean, Rick Santorum, I mean, he doesn't speak for all the Republicans, but,
No, he
you know,
does
this
not.
thing about women should be home in the kitchen, but this thing about contraception,
That's not what he
don't do
said.
that. Listen, I read too, and I hear what he says.
It's not in his
and
book.
that's what he's talking about.
Who brought up the contraception issue? Was it Rick Santorum that brought up the contraception
Rick
issue?
Santorum was...
Or was it, if I can finish,
Go ahead.
or was it George Stephanopoulos, who in one of the early debates tried to get Mitt Romney to commit on the contraception issue, and Romney correctly corrected George by saying, it's not on the ballot anywhere. It's not a bill that's pending in any state legislature. It's not something that's before Congress. Don't sit there and tell me that Rick Santorum brought up the contraception issue and made it an issue and made it the forefront of his campaign, when in fact it was the media who was obsessed with contraception, who was obsessed with Sandra Fluck getting up before Congress and saying, my stuff needs to be paid for.
$3,000 a year, which was bunk.
Listen.
A total lie.
Rick Santorum, he would have won, what was it, Rhode Island, if he
That's right.
hadn't gotten up there and started talking about women not ever being allowed to go to work and contraception.
Look, I don't think there's a war on any of them right now. I
But is
think,
there a war? I don't think there's any more of a war than there is any other big election.
If I can,
I think
weigh
there
in on
are
this.
issues that are important to all of them, but I don't think that one party is completely against another.
Okay, well, the key
I-
concept, though, is that the Democrats are accusing the Republicans of
Oh, well, the
racial-
Republicans are also accusing the
we don't have to
Democrats of a
accuse-
war on religion.
Okay, and
You know,
you've seen the
they complain
manifestation
every
there.
time we say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas when it comes time to that time of year, that it's a war on Christmas and a war on religion. And it's not just the Republicans. Let me clarify. It's the Catholics. It's every individual religion that feels like it's being persecuted every time something like that happens. And it's the women who say that, like when the Senate GOP votes down the pay equity bill, that it's a war against women. And you can't help but look at these things and say to yourself, well, maybe there are certain things that certain parties are a little less in favor of and a little more in favor of. I don't think it's fair to say that there's a war against any of this, but I certainly think that people should be smart enough to realize who has their best interest in mind, which party has their best interest in mind, and vote with that.
One thing that is clear, under the Obama administration, divisive politics is still alive and well.
And flourishing, consciously.
Boy, you know what? Well, I don't know where these gentlemen get that from. The Republicans have been playing this game long before Obama.
But you're right,
These
the
things
Democrats
they bring up these hot buttons. Listen, they all
bring
do.
up-
But
again-
don't sit there and tell me that Obama or even any other presidential candidate. This is the first time they bring up issues that will bring out their vote. Republicans haven't done that.
He
They
was
certainly have.
sold to the American people as somebody who is going to reach above the fray. Quoting him, there's not Democrat or liberal,
That's
there's
correct.
not conservative or Republican, there are Americans, except the antagonism has not ceased. If anything, it's been ramped up.
Correct.
And
By the Republicans.
not by the Democrats. Not by the Democrats.
Mitch
Is that what you're telling me?
Mitch McConnell.
Van Jones.
Mitch McConnell.
Van Jones.
2 years ago,
Van
when the
Jones.
Republicans
This
won
week,
the House,
Van
said,
Jones this
our
week.
agenda is to defeat the president and prevent his reelection. Not work for the American people.
No, he never said
not
that.
do what
No,
the common good is.
excuse me.
Oh, yes,
No,
he did,
oh,
too.
no, what he said...
not-
Now you're going to say, what he did?
No,
He
how about-
said that's his agenda.
No. What you just added is not what he said. What he said was he's going to try to work for a Republican majority because Obama's policies are problematic. He did not say he was working against America. You added...
No, I'm saying, that's my comment. He
I know.
said that their agenda was to prevent the reelection of President Obama.
Okay, we
And
have
ever
to
since
move
then,
on.
no.
We have to move on, gentlemen. We'll be back right after these messages.
This is Senator Bob Casey, and you're watching Abington News and Views.